welcome to another episode of Search News You Can Use with me, Dr. Marie Haynes. I'm recording this episode on June 26th of 2019. We've got a lot of stuff to talk about further algorithm updates. Google has been really active in making changes in the last few weeks. And so we'll talk briefly about what we think is going on with these changes and a little bit about what we're seeing in terms of sites that are seeing recoveries, sites that are getting hit as well. We'll talk a little bit about the Mercola situation. This is a natural medicine site that saw drops. Those of you who are newsletter subscribers, which you can reach at mariehaynes.com/newsletter, the free version of our newsletter has a little bit of detail about this. There's a whole bunch more detail, though, in the paid version. And we're going to start doing this a little bit more, adding a little bit more value to those who have been paid subscribers for us. So thank you if you are a paid subscriber. We're really working on making it so that it's very much worth your while, and giving you as much information on algorithm updates and SEO tips and things that you can use to improve, to reward the people who are paying us each week for giving you this information. So I've just come back from a really cool weekend where I went back to my 20-year reunion from graduating from veterinary college. It was pretty cool. You know, not everybody was practicing veterinary medicine, just like myself. I haven't practiced in 7 years now. And so I did some tours of, some of my classmates' practices. And wow, a lot of these people are doing incredibly well. And I'm so thrilled to see that. And so anyways, it was cool to be away. With that said, though, it's pretty rare that I go away and I completely shut off from the internet. And when it does happen, it's guaranteed that Google does something. The last time I think that I completely shut off from the internet while going away was when Penguin 4.0 came out, and we had been waiting for 2 years for this to happen. And then I was away. These changes that happened in the last week are not nearly as huge as Penguin, as far as we can see, but still significant. So let's jump right in and talk about this. We know that there was a big algorithm update on June 3rd of 2019. This was pre-announced by Google. It was Danny Sullivan from Google who tweeted that, yes, there was an upcoming change. And if you have not seen our post on the June 3rd update, you can find it pretty easily by Googling June 3rd Google algorithm update. And we wrote a whole bunch of things on what we feel were a part of this algorithm update. I'm not going to recap all those because we talked about it last week. You can find last week's episode. And again, if you're a paid subscriber, you've got all of this information in newsletter. But since then, there have been some changes that seem relatively significant. Not as big as June 3rd, but on June 17th to 18th, I've heard some people say 19th as well. And then also on June 23rd to 24th. So really like the week between June 17th and 24th, there were a number of our clients who saw significant changes in their Google organic traffic at that time. And so what we think is happening here is that Google is just making tweaks to whatever changes they made on June 3rd. We're fairly certain that June 3rd had a lot to do with Google's ability to assess trust for pages, for websites, and there were certain factors such as a lot of health-related factors that were considered. And so if you're seeing drops, obviously there can be many factors, and it might not even be related to trust. I think sometimes I've always warned my staff, let's be careful not to just err on the side of trying to explain everything with EAT. But as much as we try, when we look at sites that we've seen that have been affected by significant algorithm updates, we can always find stuff that's in the quality raters guidelines that can, maybe explain why these sites are seeing drops. And in a good number of cases, we can actually remedy those changes, those drops that are happening, by adding more elements of trust. And if you're new to listening to podcast, I have a really thorough article at mariehaynes.com/trust where it outlines a bunch of things that are in the quality raters guidelines that we think Google is trying to assess in terms of determining what a trustworthy website is. I wanted to talk a bit about what we're seeing with these tweaks. So when I talk about a tweak, I really have this picture that the algorithm is a bunch of dials. I don't think it's, physically dials, but there are a bunch of weighted factors in there. I mean, we know that getting a good link can help improve your rankings. We know that there are things like page speed can play a role in rankings, but we think, page speed probably doesn't have as heavy a weight as getting a high quality link would. And so there are things in Google's algorithms that are probably weighted very differently. And we feel like EAT, that each of those elements, expertise, authoritativeness, trust, they get weighted as well. And if you get either a negative score or maybe even a decimal version of a score, so, instead of multiplying something by 2, you're multiplying it by 0.2, and I'm making these numbers up completely, that can greatly impact your ability to be seen as a trustworthy website by Google, especially, if you're lacking in T, the trust in EAT. So a lot of people have pointed out to me that Mercola.com is seeing significant drops. I don't know a whole lot about Mercola. I know they've come up in some competitive reviews that we have done. Mercola, as far as I can see, talks a lot about natural medicine. And when we look at the site, the thing that people are telling me is, well, Dr. Mercola is really known as an authority in his space. And it's true. I mean, he's quoted all over the place. He's had expertise that goes back many, many years. And when you look at his health articles, they do appear to be scientifically referenced. This is one of the things that we recommend in terms of trust, that every time they've mentioned, well, not every time, but a number of times where they've mentioned that, this particular herb perhaps has been, there's evidence that shows that it could help fight inflammation. And so they reference the scientific studies, and that's really good. That's an element of trust. So why did this site see massive drops? Now, I have seen some theories online that perhaps they have issues with their AMP URLs, but that really shouldn't impact organic rankings. Yeah, I really can't see that being the whole issue. But there are definitely issues with trust here. And what I think Google has done with these latest changes starting June 3rd and extending into just last week are that they've found ways to determine whether medical articles are in line with scientific consensus. And I know that this is really a scary thing because how is it up to Google to decide that, just because a lot of doctors don't believe that a particular thing is possible or, a particular herb can potentially treat something, does that make it true? And I can understand, if Google's trying to write an algorithm to protect people from quack science, that's a tricky thing. Now, I am not saying that Dr. Mercola is quack science. I have not put enough investigation into this. I think, we have read some stuff around the web about people complaining that it's a little bit sensational, and I think it's possible that Google picks up on sentiment around the web. But I think what's most important to look at here is Amit Singh's 23 questions about Panda. These are old now. They're many, many years old, but they're still very relevant. And even just recently, John Mueller came out saying they're still very, very relevant and you should be looking at them. And so there's a couple of questions from these 23 questions that really, I think, describe the Mercola situation. One of them is, does this article tell both sides of the story? And the second one is, does this article provide a complete or comprehensive description of the topic? The other thing is, if we look in Google's quality raters guidelines, the quality raters, when they're assessing medical content, are told this. It says, high EAT information pages on scientific topics should be produced by people or organizations with appropriate scientific expertise. And here's the important part, and represent well-established scientific consensus on issues where such consensus exists. So we spent just a little bit of time looking through some of the content on Dr. Mercola's site, and I specifically looked for essential oil content. And the reason why I did that is that we noticed that a lot of sites that promote essential oils as a treatment saw drops with June algorithm changes. So I'm not here to say whether essential oils are good, whether they're bad. But what we noticed when we looked at the Dr. Mercola site was that there was, for example, there was an article about using oregano oil to treat infections. And there were links to scientific articles that really support the fact that oregano oil has some antibacterial properties. With that said, though, if I went to my doctor and I had some type of infection that they wanted to treat with antibiotics, it's very unlikely that a general practitioner is going to say, forget antibiotics, just use this oregano oil. So I'm not saying that oregano oil doesn't work. I think, I think there's evidence to show that it can really help. But the way that the article was presented from Mercola.com is that it's kind of, let's get rid of our antibiotics. Let's just treat everything with oregano oil. It doesn't say that exactly, but this is how I believe some people are interpreting it. The other thing that I think is really important is that not only are they saying, hey, oregano oil is amazing, and, they haven't presented both sides of the story. They haven't said, well, a traditional physician, may have issues with it because of this, this, and this. But I think that one of the issues is that there is a heavy sales element on these pages. Some of the sites that we saw drop that were in the natural medicine space, it was like they were shouting out, hey, carrots cure cancer, and by the way, we sell carrots. And I think you can understand what I'm saying here is, and I don't think that Dr. Mercola, again, is making these outlandish claims, but they're not presenting both sides of the story. So if you have a natural medicine site and you're selling things like essential oils, natural fertility treatments, or things like this, we see all sorts of sites that are trying to promote these ways of circumventing natural medicine and using other things. I think that one of the keys in ranking better is to actually present a balanced case. And so a lot of these natural medicine sites kind of come out as if they're saying, oh, doctors are all awful, they're just trying to make money, their pockets are lined by big pharma. If that's the type of tone that you have on your site, it's possible that Google will not want to rank you well. And so, we could go into, I could probably talk for the next 6 hours on things that you can do to improve that trust level. That's something that we include in our reports. So if you're interested in having a site review, that's something where we can give you very specific information saying, look, you have information on this page, but if you added this and you changed these words and you added this element, that can help improve not only Google's perception of trust, but also users' perception of trust as well. I think that's all we'll do to talk about the latest algorithm tweaks. We saw a number of our e-commerce sites that saw nice gains on June 3rd, saw further gains on either, between June 17th and June 24th. And so I think Google probably tweaked the dial on brand authority. It seems that all of the sites that saw big improvements were sites that already had good brand recognition. And so, we're still putting together data. We're still working through a big backlog of sites that have come to us for site reviews. And so usually, a month or two after an algorithm update, we'll have even more information on what types of things were affected because we've had a chance to look into specific sites in more detail. I think we'll move on here to some of the more important things that you need to know in terms of Google announcements. There's a new feature in Search Console for testing URLs. So things like AMP pages, rich results, you can actually search from within Search Console now and search the code, and you can make tweaks to it. So if you have code that perhaps is for structured data on your page and you want to see like, oh, what happens if I change it to this? You can test that from right within Search Console. So that's kind of cool. There was a Google blog post just this week about how Chrome is taking more steps to protect people from deception. This is really a big thing that seems to be on Google's radar. And I know some of you are saying, well, wait, there's a lot of stuff they're doing wrong. Because, in terms of Google My Business reviews, there's still a lot of really spammy stuff that's happening there. But baby steps, right? So Chrome... now they're inviting us to install a Chrome extension, and what it is an ability to report to Google any site that you think is suspicious. So, and I don't want you to go installing this Chrome extension and just reporting all of your competitors. I think Google they've learned over the years how to know which types of spam reports to pay attention to. If you're just spamming and reporting your competitors, it's just going to get ignored. It's not going to do anything. But if you do come across a site that appears to be phishing or wants you to download malware or something like that, that's the type of thing that you can report using this browser extension. Of course, the cynical part of me is thinking back to the days where Google gave us the toolbar PageRank, not quite a Chrome extension because Chrome wasn't around in those days, but same sort of thing, right? We install this thing and then we give Google a ton of data back. So I don't know whether installing the extension gives Google more data about your browsing history. I think they already know that anyways. Maybe I should just take off the tinfoil hat. The other thing that this Chrome change is going to do is they're going to try to make it so that they can identify confusing URLs. And what they said by that is, for example, if you were trying to go to google.com, but you went to go0gle.com, which looks very similar, but obviously is not the same URL. Chrome should now be able to pick up that, hey, they normally go to google.com and this isn't right, and looks like it could be some type of a malicious attempt at tricking people, and you'll apparently get some sort of warning. I think that this is important for us to pay attention to because some of you may actually have websites that are very close variations of other URLs. And, actually, just as I'm saying this reminds me of several months ago where we saw sites like there was a site that was dmv.something and IRS.com, I think, rather than .gov, or it was .org. But there were sites that could confuse people because people who were trying to go to the actual official organization were ending up on these, private company sites. And this could be part of what's happening here. So I think that's something we're going to consider in sites that have seen traffic drops is whether Google is getting better at figuring out if you are an authoritative official organization or not. Dr. Pete had an interesting observation about knowledge panels. He found, and I don't usually say in podcast stuff about SERP changes. There's tons of stuff in newsletter about that. If you're thinking, hey, we saw these weird featured snippets, and I don't know if that's normal. Usually we've covered it in newsletter. These ones are like featured snippets that appear where we're used to seeing the knowledge panel. So on desktop, on the right-hand side of your screen, and they look like a hybrid between a knowledge panel and a featured snippet. So right now, Dr. Pete is seeing in his data, he's seeing that maybe 2 to 3% of all the search results have this. I think we'll pay attention to that because that's the type of thing that I think could steal traffic from a lot of websites, or if we can figure out how to get into these, and who knows, that's funny, get into these. I was going to talk about entities, getting into these entities. I think it's probably connected to entities, and I think that Google can determine whether an entity is known as an authoritative entity. And so this probably all comes back to EAT. So we're going to keep an eye on those and see if there's a way that we can sort of encourage Google to consider us more of an authority, consider businesses that we work with more authoritative. Probably, though, it all comes down to links and mentions on authoritative sites. And I think a huge part of how Google determines authority is just, are other experts talking about you or your client as an expert in your industry? I thought this was an interesting question on Twitter. Joy Hawkins asked John Mueller about if somebody clicks on a drop-down in the search results, say, for example, to expand FAQ schema, does that count as a click in Search Console? The answer is no. So John said that a click only counts when somebody actually visits your site. So that's interesting, right? I mean, there's a lot of discussion as to whether if you win FAQ positions, people also ask positions, whether you actually get more traffic or less. And I think it's query dependent, and it's the type of thing that you need to be testing. Let's see here. I really liked this tweet by Ryan Muse that we included in newsletter talking about winning featured snippets. And he described their process for winning featured snippets. And actually, you'll see in newsletter, his tweet shows, the moment they won these featured snippets, their impressions and their clicks went up dramatically. And he didn't say exactly what area the featured snippets were in. But here's his tweet that talks about what they did. So he said, they went after high search volume keywords that already ranked on page 1, but didn't own the featured snippet. Then they incorporated keywords into the header tags, so the H tags. Started content below the header tags with 2 descriptive, to-the-point, keyword-rich sentences. And that's what we always advise. If you're trying to win a featured snippet, make really good use of your H tags, and then make sure that the first couple of sentences in your paragraph are ones that would make sense to be in a featured snippet. And often we'll find that just tweaking even the position of certain words can help us pop into that featured snippet. It's not, and the featured snippet algorithm changes dramatically all the time, because Google is trying to figure out what's the best way to present people with content. But yeah, so those are kind of cool tips if you're trying to win more featured snippets. Somebody asked John Mueller about whether all links to your website appear in Search Console. I get asked this a lot. A lot of people don't understand that if you disavow a link in Google's disavow tool, it doesn't change the fact that it still displays in Search Console. So disavowing a link will not remove it from Search Console for you. Similarly, if a link is nofollowed, it will still be in Search Console. It's not like Search Console just shows you the links that are passing PageRank. And so that's an important thing to know. I think most of you probably know that, but I get asked that every couple of months or so. I disavowed this link and it's still being seen in Search Console. How can I know it was disavowed? I would love that Google would, I wish they had a column in Search Console that basically said whether a particular link was being disavowed by them. I think that would solve a lot of problems where, we see all the time people upload a disavow file incorrectly. For example, we've seen sites where they've uploaded their disavow to a non-canonical version. So for example, if your website was HTTPS and you upload your disavow file to HTTP, but not HTTPS, we don't know if those links are actually disavowed. So if Google showed those in Search Console and just had a column saying which ones are being actively ignored by Google, I think that would be incredibly helpful. Maybe that's something I'll suggest to John at some point. Another question here about link penalties or about penalties. So penalties, this is actually an interesting point. I was in a court case a few years ago as an expert witness, and one of the issues that we were discussing was whether a manual action was actually a penalty. And we can get into semantics here, but in most cases, they have some sort of a punitive effect. I still like to kind of call them manual actions more than penalties just because So the question was whether penalties always have a manual reviewer. And what John Mueller said was that some manual actions are actually reviewed automatically. And so an example would be security issues. And so he said some of the security issues do have large automatic component, recrawl and check if it's okay. That makes them much faster to be processed. I have a theory. This is a theory about link penalties. If you have an unnatural links penalty, I believe that Google, the web spam team, probably has some sort of a dashboard that says, here's, an example of some of the links that we think are causing problems here or are unnatural links. And I do think that there's a programmatic check where they can just quickly go out and say, okay, we've identified, I don't know how many, 10, 100, who knows how many links that we've identified as unnatural links. And then they can programmatically just go and figure out, are those links all still there? Do they all still have keyword anchor text? Have any of them been removed? Have any of them had a nofollow added to them? And that way they can quickly see whether a site owner has made drastic changes in order to remove a link-related penalty. And then it goes to a web spam team member. I think it's even possible that there are different levels of web spam team members. I feel like in the days when we were doing tons of manual actions, it was like we would, we'd get a very quick response in our first couple of attempts. And then when we got to the point where, we were pretty much ready to get the penalty removed. And sometimes we would do, incremental attempts because we weren't sure exactly which types of links Google was looking at. And then all of a sudden, instead of waiting for 2 days to hear a response back, it would be like 2 weeks. And I would tell my clients, this is a good sign because I think this means that we've moved on to to the senior web spam team, having a good look. And in most cases, when we had to wait a couple more weeks, we almost always got the penalty lifted. Interesting, right? I mean, I do think that in terms of manual actions for unnatural links, thin content, things like that, most of the review is manually done, is my thought, but I don't have 100% proof on that. I thought this was really an interesting story that Joe Youngblood tweeted about, that apparently in Australia, a judge has ruled that media companies are liable for comments left by their readers. And there's a whole very sad story about somebody who had a news story written about them, and then in the comments, people were commenting very bad things to defame his character. And so he sued I don't know if it was Facebook or what social media, or maybe it's the company itself. I think it was probably the company itself. And so this sort of emphasizes the point of being able to moderate your comments. My concern when I read this is that I think that a lot of sites are going to be so terrified of litigation that they'll just remove comments from their websites. I would encourage you not to do that. If you have comments on your website, Gary Ish has said in the past that it's truly a ranking factor. If Google sees that there's a thriving community, if Google sees that the comments have loads of good information, that people are engaging with the comments, this can be a ranking factor, and it can be a good thing. Conversely, if comments, are adding a bunch of junk to your page, and you're just allowing anybody to post a comment, and maybe you're posting links, as spammers are trying to post comments, that can add as a negative to your page. So comments can be important, and so comments often are a way to differentiate. If you've written an article on a topic that many other people have covered, but yet you have this discussion that people really want to read, that can be a sign of high quality that could push you up. We've seen it in terms of rankings. So don't rush to get rid of your comments, but do spend time moderating comments. I mean, if you have left a comment on our site, I'm still the one who answers all of the comments on our site, and I get a little bit behind on that. And the reason being is that I don't auto-publish my comments. I want to read each one to make sure that I'm not publishing spam. We have people who leave comments whose name is NFL jerseys in China. Very clearly they're trying to spam. And so you don't want to have those types of comments on your site for sure. A little bit of news in the local space. If you are doing SEO for any attorney that does work with sex crimes, those queries, if anybody searched for, if somebody was looking for a criminal attorney to defend them in some type of a sex crime case, those results got completely removed from Google several months ago, I believe, maybe even a year ago. And apparently some of those are coming back now. So I know that doesn't apply to many people, but it's good to see that, I think it sounds like Google probably removed them because whatever was in the algorithm was allowing a lot of spam to surface. And so they've found ways probably to assess trust and to determine, but mind you, there are examples out there again of people spamming. So who knows how long this will stay. I know Joy Hawkins commented on her forum that it's really unusual that Google decides to remove a category and then bring it back again. So, keep an eye on that space if that's something that is important to your clients. Let's see what else we can cover here. There's some interesting information on capturing short names in Google My Business. To be honest, I have not looked into this in great detail, but from what it sounds like is you can generate a short link to get clients to your Google My Business profile. Sounds to me like it would be a good way to say, hey, leave a review on our website. I mean, we currently, for some of our clients, will say, hey, ask your customers to leave a review and take a screenshot of, tell them to search for your business and take a screenshot and show where they click on website and then where they click on reviews. It would be much easier to just say, follow this link and leave us a review. So that's kind of cool. We got to figure out what we want our short name to be for our Google My Business. There's a lot of pressure, to do that. Still with Google My Business, they mentioned that there is a bit of a delay, a bit of a backlog. They recently made it so that it's much easier to get information from Google My Business. If you want to report a problem, you can tweet at them. They have a Twitter account, and you can follow them, send them a direct message, and they'll generally respond within a few days. But it seems like they have a backlog now. So you've been waiting for Google My Business to respond. There's about a 2 to 3 week delay at this point. There's also, according to Joy Hawkins, some type of a bug in Google My Business Q&A where it's getting difficult for a business owner to respond. Apparently, if you're responding to Q&A in Google My Business, it should say, here's a response coming from the owner, but instead it puts the individual's name instead of the owner. So if you're noticing that, that is a bug, and hopefully that'll be fixed. So I'd like to move on to Q&A. If you are a listener or a newsletter reader and you have a question for me or my team, then feel free to jump in a newsletter. We have a link to a Q&A form, and I'm trying to cover as many of these as I can in podcasts because we get some really, really good questions. And more often than not, if you have a question, other people are going to have a similar one. So we'll start off with this question, and to be honest with you, I don't have the answer to it. So, but I think it can generate some discussion. My question is it possible to view image search traffic results for competitors' images? And so this person is doing content migration, and they want to see what competitors are ranking for and how much traffic they're getting for image search. So, I mean, obviously, if they're competitors, you're not going to have access to their Search Console and Google Analytics and whatnot. And as far as I don't know that any of the major tools actually estimates traffic from search. This person said they experimented with Ahrefs and could not find the answer. I had a bit of a look in SEMrush. And I don't think that they specifically talk about search volume coming from image search for competitors, but I feel like there has to be a way to do this. So if you are listening to this and you have some ideas for me, then please tweet at me. It's Marie_Haynes, Haynes. And I'll tweet about this, and we'll, if we get some good answers, we'll put it in the next newsletter. So yeah, sorry I don't have the actual answer for that for you, but it's a really, really good question. We're really doing a lot of work now with competitive reviews and looking at, this particular competitor seems to have skyrocketed with a recent algorithm update. And we can say, we think it's because they've implemented this and that type of thing. You can learn a lot by looking at competitors, provided you're not just blindly repeating everything they do. You can learn quite a bit. The last question is a very, very quick one, but it could have a long answer, is what is the best way to learn SEO? There was a really good Twitter poll by Bill Swalski this week where he asked that question, and there were some really good answers. He asked, did you learn from forums? Where did you learn from? So myself, I hurt my back and I was on bed rest for, I think it was 6 weeks. And I've always wanted to learn how to create a website. So we got a laptop at that time and I created this website. I did a tutorial on about.com, created a Hello World page. I ended up downloading some template from some free template site and figuring out how to tweak the HTML. And then I was getting like 30 to 34 people a day to my website, and I could not figure out how to get more people. So I started hanging out in SEO forums, and back in the day, the SEO chat forums were really, I would spend hours in this forum every day. And so I was asking questions, and then as I learned more, I was answering questions. And that one website that I was initially getting 30 people a day to, at its peak was getting 15,000 visitors a day, which, sadly it's been neglected and it doesn't do that anymore. But the point is that I knew nothing about SEO and then learned by being curious. So I would say the absolute best way to learn SEO is to create a website. You don't necessarily have to do the route that I did and learn all of the HTML behind it. I learned HTML, CSS, MySQL, and PHP in order to create my website. I think you can use some of these website builders. WordPress makes, it's very easy to make a website. And then experiment with trying to get more traffic to it. and start implementing things and start playing around with optimizing your page. When you've done that for a little bit, then go out and talk to friends of yours that have businesses. The one thing I would say, though, is don't go and try to sell SEO services until you've actually had some success, because we see this all the time. We see people who are very, very good at selling themselves as expert SEOs, and when we look at their homepage of their client site, the title tag on the homepage says home, and unless you're a realtor, and even then that's not the best use of your title tag, it's not a good idea, and so there's some very, very basic stuff that you need to get a handle on before you start charging money for clients for doing this. My philosophy has always been, not to charge money for something unless we feel like we are really good at doing this. And then when we're really good at doing it, you can start charging a little bit more because you know that you have good success. And then you have client testimonials to back you up with that. So, I think forums are a good way to learn, but keep in mind with forums that anybody can answer. And just because a lot of people believe something is true doesn't necessarily mean that it is true. And then the next thing I would advise is to do lots of testing. We're just getting back to this now. We sort of had this period of explosive growth where we were just trying to survive and keep up with our waiting list. And now we're actually starting to do a few more tests. I've got a test running right now about involving robots.txt file, and we have a couple of other ones as well. So if you're trying to decide, can I win a featured snippet by doing what Marie Haynes said and making, putting keywords in my H tags and writing a descriptive sentence underneath? Try it out. Try it out on just certain pages and see if you win the featured snippets for those. So I think learning SEO is a lot about experimentation, and don't be afraid to do that. I'd also say don't be afraid to be vulnerable. I mean, I asked some dumb questions in SEO forums. I'm actually in my MozCon talk. I think I'm going to be looking at some of these dumb questions and talking about how I had 0 EAT for SEO back then, but through learning and a number of other things, you can build up EAT. Anyhow, I think that's enough babbling on for this episode. I really, really appreciate that you are a listener to the podcast. I get so much great feedback, so thank you for that. If there's anything that you feel that we could add to this or that you feel is more or less valuable, feel free to tweet at me, Marie_Haynes. And and I think that's about all that we're going to do here. So have a fantastic week, and I wish you the best of luck with your rankings.